also known as JB Font, and we are here on the JB Show, part of the Fred Hampton Leftist Network. And I have a very special and brilliant guest on today. His name is Kahmali Rose. Kamali Rose is a political commentator and host of the Radical Democracy Show. Kamali, how are you doing today? But I can actually assume that you're doing very well because that shirt is fire.
Thank you, thank you. Doing great, of course. Appreciate you having me on, James. Always enjoy, chatting with you and catching up with you and just discussing politics, news of the day with you. So, you
Mhm.
are also a brilliant voice on the left, and so
Thank you. Thank you.
an inspirational one as well. So, glad to be on here with you. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Um, there was a couple of topics that we wanted to discuss, and I always like to, ask my guests when they come on, what do they want to discuss, and something that's of peak interest to them. One of the things, and that's of great interest to me as well, is that you wanted to discuss workplace democracy. Um, Now, I would like to get what your definition of workplace democracy is, and let's see if we can square that circle with what my definition of workplace democracy is.
Absolutely. So right now, we know that the way that most businesses run in here in the United States is, in any capitalist, system, is that you have a handful of people, the board of directors that are the decision makers, they're the employer, and they have all the decision making power in the company. It's usually the larger the company gets, the smaller, the more disproportionate that group is to the proportion of workers, the people that are actually there, doing the actual labor in a company. And that board of directors has all the decision making power. Who gets to work, where you work, when you work, how, what tools you use to work with, and what gets done with the surplus of your labor. And
Mhm.
so in a democratic workplace, some of the many times they're referred to as worker cooperatives or worker self-directed enterprises. The idea of workplace democracy, and the idea of democracy in general, is if something affects me directly, then I should have an equal say in determining the outcome of that. And so, with workplace democracy, the idea is one worker, one vote on all major decisions, which are the decisions that are typically made by the employer class in a capitalist system. So, who gets to work, where we work, how we work, when we work, and what gets done with the surplus of our labor. That is all controlled democratically by the workers. So how that looks is it can be very different from one workplace to another in democratic workplaces. Many people have the idea that a democratic workplace means that everyone gets paid the same amount of money, and that's just not true. That's not the case. There are plenty of democratic workplaces, plenty of examples of workplace democracy where workers have a variation of wages. Some workplaces they get together and they decide. And the way that looks is, you come to work and you show up to work, say 4 days a week, and you do your regular duties, whatever you would normally do in the course of a day. And then maybe one day a week you get together and you have a meeting and you discuss the sort of broader issues and systems that you want to implement. And it can be one day a week, or it can be one day a month. And for some people, it's only one day a quarter that they get together and do this. So it's not strict in any way. It's really for those workers to decide what they're comfortable with, what works for them. And the idea is that allows people to self-determine, right? To have some sense of control over their own labor, and again, most importantly, the surplus of that labor. Because Marx was famous for recognizing what he really studied and recognized was that he looked at the surplus of labor in different economic systems, right? So who controls the surplus of labor? And what he found was that whoever controls the surplus of labor essentially controls society, really. And so
Definitely. Yeah.
in monarchies, we had kings and queens who controlled the surplus of labor. You had the kings and queens, and then all of the subjects within their kingdom, and the subjects in their kingdom would work, and the surplus of their labor would go to those kings and queens. In feudal systems, we had lords and serfs. The lords controlled the land,
Yeah.
landlords, and the serfs worked that land, and 4 days a week the serfs would work that land for the lord, and whatever they produced in those 4 days would be given over to the lord of the land, and the additional 3 days was for them to work their own land for themselves and their families, right? So even under feudal systems, there was only a 4 day work week technically, right? The other 3 days was spent taking care of yourself and your family, right? And
Yeah.
then under slavery, you had the master and the slave, and the master controlled pretty much 100% of the surplus of the slave's labor, but then they would still give to the slave enough food, clothing, and shelter, just enough for the slave to survive, right? Because they don't want that slave to die. They need that slave's labor, so they need that slave to be able to continue to survive. So now in capitalist systems, we have employer, employee, and the
Hmm.
employer is the one that controls the surplus of your labor, makes all those decisions for you. And essentially what we have set up now is a system of wage slavery, is what Marx referred to it as. And what we're calling for in workplace democracy is for the actual a control of the means of production by the workers. So worker self-directed enterprises or worker controlled enterprises, worker cooperatives. And so that we socialists, modern day socialists, or the 21st century socialists.
Hmm.
Now, our belief is that we focused a little too much on the sort of macro systems in economics, and the
Yeah.
looking at things like focusing too much on, well, is it the state or private control over enterprises? And what we believe, as modern day socialists, is that is not as important whether it's the state or a private enterprise, really, so much as who is making the decisions on a day-to-day basis within those enterprises. And so the belief is that we need a democratic system. And really, if how can a country like America that prides itself on being a democratic country and spreading democracy all over the world, how can we even say that we do that when we don't even implement democracy in the place where the majority of adults spend the majority of their waking hours of their lives, either at the job, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and many more hours are spent either getting ready for that job or recuperating from that job. We have this thing called happy hour that happens at around 6 o'clock every day at bars around the country. And the reason they call it the happy hour is probably because they're understanding that the previous 8 hours were not so happy.
Right.
So we spend a lot of time even just recuperating and recovering from the work that we do. And we believe that we would have a much fairer system where people were able to make those decisions without this authoritarian system where they're being sort of dictated to from above. And
Hmm.
we believe that that's a much fairer system, and one that'll teach people how to actually participate in democracy, because we've sort of lost control
Yeah.
over our political democracy at this point.
Hmm.
Because again, the people who control the surplus control the society, really. And so because these capitalists, this employer class controls the surplus of our labor right now, they use
Hmm.
that surplus of our labor to do things like fund politicians, to donate to different politicians and different causes, and in order to control our society, really. And so the only way that we will ever take back control of our political democracy is if we first institute economic democracy.
That is a well fleshed out explanation, and I appreciate that. Um, and it definitely coincides with what my take on what workplace democracy is. Workplace democracy is exactly how it sounds. You have a say in what your employer does. And in a sense, you are also an entrepreneur within that system because you also get to dictate. And your contribution to being an entrepreneur is the labor that you provide for that establishment. So therefore, you are a stakeholder just like everyone else. As
Absolutely, absolutely.
so as far as being a participant in workplace democracy. If people had workplace democracy, a lot of the especially manufacturing jobs wouldn't have been shipped overseas. Outsourcing would be a rarity if we had workplace democracy, because a lot of these workers would not vote to have their jobs taken away.
It's tell me any set of workers that would ever get together and vote if everyone was given an equal say, a democratic vote in a decision like should we relocate our plant from Detroit. Look at what happened in Detroit, Michigan. Should we
Hmm.
relocate our plant in Detroit
Hmm.
to Mexico or to China? You give all
Hmm.
the workers a vote on that. Are the workers going to ship their jobs overseas when they don't all want to go move to Mexico or to China? Is there who believes, who here believes that those workers would collectively get together and decide to send their jobs to another country where, for the idea that you can exploit some cheaper labor over in some foreign country somewhere? Why would they want to do that when that means that they no longer have a job and have a means of supporting themselves and staying, having some sort of safety net for themselves? So no group of workers would ever get together collectively and agree to outsource their own jobs.
Yeah,
So I completely agree with you in that sense.
yeah. If we had workplace democracy, NAFTA, TPP, and what's the other one? The newest one that Obama wanted to implement. I forgot the name of it. But these trade deals would have never taken place. In fact, they would have been laughed at out of the room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, what they call free trade is something that what we should be looking for is fair trade, not free trade, because free trade means it's free for capital, right? Because labor isn't able to move freely across borders, but capital
Hmm.
is, right? We
Hmm.
have all kinds of laws that keep people from migrating to our country. Look at what we're doing on our southern border right now. But
Hmm.
capital is allowed to flow freely between borders. And so
Yes.
the freedom is really for capital and not for the laborers or the workers.
Yeah. And so this is one of the reasons why socialism is decried upon capitalists, because it's so labor intensive. Uh, what Gene commented said, yes, let's support the idea of international unions. This sounds like something that is great to me, because I would love to see a union just for servers, or a union just for retail workers, a retail workers union, or customer service reps union. So the thing is that when it comes to workplace democracy, it's also a means of saying, okay, so you guys want to keep us at a specific wage? No, we're not going to do that. This is what we all vote. It's unanimous. Okay, so we're going to have a living wage? Perfect. This is what we vote on. And the thing is we should not accept, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that word. We should not accept totalitarianism in our workplace. That is
Absolutely.
that is unacceptable. If we accept totalitarianism at our workplace, then guess what? We're going to accept it in our government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what we've seen is that whatever systems exist within the economic system,
Hmm.
they replay themselves out inside of our political system. So, we've essentially existed under an oligarchic system here in our economic system, where the wealthiest people are the deciders and the decision makers, and
Hmm.
it's an authoritarian system, of course. And we've
Hmm.
replayed that out inside of our political system, where we elect these leaders and
Hmm.
we give them this untold power over us to
Hmm.
make all these decisions. And we can see what happens, whether the employer is a private employer or the state. You still end up with similar situations happening. Like, look what happened when Trump was president, and they didn't enact the budget, and hundreds of thousands of workers were
Hmm.
out of work for nearly a month. And so all those workers just were bumped off their job just like that. And so
Yeah.
whether the employer is the state or the employer is a private institution, as long as you have this employer-employee relationship, there's an inherent contradiction within that setup, where you have an inherent tension within that system, where the employer is always trying to extract as much labor for as little cost as possible from the worker, and the worker is constantly trying to extract as much benefits as they can from the employer, while giving up as little of their labor as possible, because people should be expected and allowed to have time for leisure. And more we see that even here in America, where we're considered so free and democratic, we work more hours on average than many other countries, because people are working these low-paying jobs and forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat, especially with our pathetic minimum wage that we have in this country as well. And one little bit of pushback that I'll give on, and I don't even know if it's necessarily pushback, but sort of a counterpoint to your point about unions, is that I think I support unions in general. I support unions because I support any sort of labor power, of course. But I think that one of the issues with unions is that they also operate in an essentially undemocratic way. Unfortunately, we still elect union leaders. It's still what most would recognize as a representative democracy, which is very similar to what we do in our political system, right? We elect representatives, and then we hope and we pray that those representatives will actually represent our best interests. And what we find all too often with unions is that they get way too comfortable with the capitalist class, and they will actually block things like strikes. Many of the strikes that have been effective in recent years have been wildcat strikes that go outside of the unions, that actually, like the teacher strikes that rose up in 2017 and 2018, were wildcat strikes operating outside of unions. And the solution that socialists have for the sort of collective operation in cooperative existence internationally is to build international collectives and international cooperatives where we are able to function all democratically still. One example of this is in Rojava in northern Syria. They are instituting a system known as democratic confederalism, and the idea there is each entity operates as a democratic workplace, but they also work together collectively and have a democratic decision-making process collectively as well. Now, there is some representational democracy within that, but it's at the base level, it is much more democratic, and there's much more democracy throughout the entire system as well. And with unions, with unions, you always run into this issue of, and it happens within our political system as well. When the fewer people that you have to have in control, it makes it easier to corrupt those individuals, right? All you have to do is to corrupt one individual, and then you can have control over hundreds or thousands of people at that point. And so with the more direct democracy we have, my belief is that you can't, in order to corrupt a system like direct democracy, right, that means that you have to do something where you essentially have to corrupt every single person within that system. And if you do that, well, then good for you. That means that you still are implementing the will of the people. If they want to be quote unquote corrupted by it in some way, you pay off every single person within a democracy. Well, that means that they see it as a better benefit to themselves. And so be it if they want to enact whatever policy you are trying to push for. But that's why I also, alongside workplace democracy, something that I often advocate for and always try to advocate for is collective cooperative economies as well, where we are making sure that we're still working together in a way that we don't have to all out compete against one another, and we can actually cooperate with one another. In the case of democratic confederalism, the way that plays out is that each of these democratic workplaces, they are required to contribute up to about 5% of their revenues to a collective fund, where that is then democratically decided on what gets done with that fund. It can be used for mutual aid. It can be used for, as a social safety net. It can be used as a strike fund to support striking workers. So in that, decision making is still done collectively and democratically as well. And so we can implement systems like that where people are still, each enterprise still has autonomy, because 95% of what you're earning is still decided over democratically by the people directly within that institution. But we are still, all of our successes contribute to the success of everyone within that system, and we don't have to see each other as competitors, but rather as, you know, cooperators in one, you know, global system, a cosmopolitan system where we see each other as one global community, essentially.
Collaboration, yeah.
Exactly.
I want to clarify, to a socialist, unions are the lesser evil.
Yes.
Unions are the compromise. So that's what I should clarify. I want to make sure I clarify that. So having workplace democracy and workers basically owning the means of production is my ultimate goal. I want to get here to the chat because there are some questions here,
Yep.
and I
Yep.
think it would
Let's
be
do it.
great for us to answer.
Yes. Let's do it.
Let's see. QKR Socialist presented a question. He said, "How can we promote and discuss workplace co-ops more easily? A hashtag, a Discord channel on FHL. Professor Wolf teaches that there are so many models. How can we discuss options?" Um, First of all, as far as a Discord channel, if you go to our Patreon, we actually have the access to our Discord there. So we do have a Discord, just letting you know. And promoting and discussing workplace co-ops, we're doing it right now.
Yep.
But it shouldn't be just Kahmali and myself or anybody else that has a camera and a microphone. Workplace co-ops need to be discussed with pretty much anybody you come in contact with that is a worker.
Yep.
Anyone. I don't care if they make six figures a year. You talk about workplace co-ops with them.
That's what
And
I was I was working as a software engineer with, you know, making six figures, and I was out there, you know, talking about workplace democracy within the workplace. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so with that, QKR Socialist, um, the moment you hear somebody complain about their job, because everybody does, we all complain. It's going to happen. You can throw a rock and you'll hit somebody who complains about their job. The moment you find somebody who does that, you bring up, man, this is why people need to be able to have a say in their workplace. It should be there should be democracy in the workplace. And if you get someone who talks against that, it's easy to push back on them because it go, so you're against democracy in the workplace?
Boom.
And
Yes.
then watch
Exactly.
them twist themselves into a pretzel on that one.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you basically have to advocate for a dictatorship or totalitarian rule within the workplace.
Yep. Yep.
And
Absolutely.
how does that make you sound? And all
Absolutely.
you need to do is ask questions. Just ask questions. That's all you need to do. Just keep asking questions. And then watch. And grab some popcorn while you do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The, like you said, the question is, do you believe in democracy? And that's the jumping off point is, do you believe in democracy? And if you truly believe in democracy, why do we ban democracy in the place where the majority of adults are spending the majority of the waking hours of their lives? Why would we support democracy, but not in the place where we're all spending most of our time? That doesn't sound like true support over democracy. And I would say that, you know, it has to go beyond social media as well. Of course, we should absolutely use social media as a platform. Social media is what helped things like the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, gain prominence in the United States and around the world, really. And so we shouldn't ignore social media. We should absolutely use social media, but we also need to support organizations that are supportive of workplace democracy. Try to seek out, institutions that are operating as worker cooperatives, and patronize those places, like buy and use services from those places as well. But also, we have to do the work ourselves wherever we exist, wherever we are working, to begin to radicalize our coworkers in this way, and to try to institute workplace democracy wherever it is that we exist, right? So that's what we're doing at the Radical Democracy Show. We operate democratically. We are absolutely committed to developing a democratic workplace, one worker, one vote on all major decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's about actually instituting it right where we are. And so, it absolutely can, social media is an important part of it. I think that using social media to talk about it in any way that you can is absolutely a good idea. But I think that we have to also go beyond that and start to just build it. A great example that I'll give is Mondragon, right? There's a place in the Basque region of Spain, and it is it's called, there's a place there called a company there called Mondragon. And Mondragon was developed, it started 60 years ago now. And 60 years ago, it was started by a priest, Father Arizmendi, Jose Arizmendi.
Mm-hmm.
And it was founded in 1956. And it started with 5 people. This one priest and 5 other people, he got together, and he started this company. And in that time, and he developed it as a democratic workplace. And since then, since starting this democratic workplace with 6 people, by 2019, there were over 80,000 people were employed by Mondragon cooperatives. All of those institutions operating as democratic workplaces, and together making up a federation of worker cooperatives known as the Mondragon Corporation. That corporation is now the 7th largest company in Spain, and companies like General Electric, Microsoft, they send people over to Mondragon to learn how to be as productive as those institutions are. So to anybody that believes that, we'll lose productivity if we have, democracy is so slow, and it's a difficult process and it's very slow. Well, they've actually found that workers are more productive in enterprises where they have control over their labor. And of course, why wouldn't you? When I was an entrepreneur, I was originally a software engineer. I developed a platform known as Nimblenotes. You can go right now, nimblenotes.com. It's an online note-taking and study platform for students. And I was an entrepreneur. I was able to build that thing and found it, and I dedicated all the time that I had to that because I felt ownership over it. Of course, I felt connected to it and felt responsible for it in a way, because I didn't feel alienated from it the way that capitalism alienates us from our work, right? We go to work, we show up at work, we produce, we produce these goods and services, and then at the end of the day, whatever we've produced, the employer says, you leave that here, and if you dare to take that home, they send some folks to your house with some blue outfits on, some blue uniforms, and some billy clubs and some guns, and they'll send them to your house and take that back from you forcefully if you dare to take home the means of production. So those are known as cops here. And so we definitely, people can see it's almost obvious why people would be more productive in those systems. But that started as 6 people 60 years ago, and now it employs over 80,000 people. Imagine if we did 100 of those, right? If we could build 100 of those kind of worker cooperatives across the country, then and trust me, they exist right now. There are worker cooperatives all across the United States, and some large companies that people know, like Land O'Lakes, that actually operate as technically a farmer-owned cooperative. They're not as democratic as a true worker cooperative in that sense, but they do operate as farmer owned and so worker owned institutions. So so I would just use Mondragon as an example of how we can actually, it doesn't even require so much, the social media aspect of it isn't as important as the actual development of these institutions, because by developing these institutions, now Mondragon has their own university, they have their own, security forces, their own police forces. So, and they can all democratically decide over how those things operate, right? So, and we send people from, these major institutions, send people to these universities to learn how to be as productive as these institutions. So I would just urge people to also look at how we just start to build it ourselves and not wait around for a hashtag or anything like that. We can do it right now where we are, where we work, and just by building it up. It might only be a handful of people to start with, but we can, that handful of people 50 years from now, imagine if we have 100 of these things, that's 100, that's 8 million people covered under workplace democracy and in a cooperative collective enterprises. And so I don't think we even need to wait around for a big social media push or anything like that. We just got to start instituting it wherever we exist, wherever we are, especially in these spaces where we have a lot of control, right? Fred Hampton leftists, they have total control over their institution right now. Like you all control that totally. You don't have any employer class over you that's gonna that has to dictate down to you. So right at Fred Hampton leftists, we can start institutions like that. Within Radical Democracy Show, we build institutions like that, and we start to work together collectively and cooperatively and grow in that sense. And so I think that's the real sort of push that we need to make, and the real way to develop workplace democracy is to just show people that we lead by example, essentially, right? Just show them that we can do it by doing it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to respond to Pro Center in the comments, and he says Mondragon is not the paragon of socialist democracy y'all seem to think it is, and you know what, that may be true, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we have right now.
Absolutely.
And so to decry something that is much better than what we have right now as on the right direction, what would you? It's like, what would you rather have right now? A totalitarian job, which basically 99% of Americans already have, or something where they actually have voting power over what they can do. I understand that nothing is perfect, but at the same time, nothing is perfect. No system is perfect. Not socialism is not perfect, but at least it's something that we can implement to be better, way better than what we have. And it's not a lesser of two evils. It's something that is far and above better than what we have now. You know what I mean?
Yep. And 2 points on that. One point I'll give just as an example of why it's such a better system. Here in the US, we have, under our capitalist system that we have, our capitalist economic system, we have something like they review the pay disparity between CEOs, the people, what is the pay disparity within any one institution, right? Between the highest paid worker and the lowest paid or average pay of a worker, right? And in the United States, at some of our largest corporations, that proportion tends to be something like about 300 to 1 at this point. So the highest paid person is getting paid about 300 times more than the average pay or lowest paid worker, right? And so it's about 300 to 1. In Mondragon, it's 8 to 1. That is the largest proportion of in any one of those institutions. In some of the places, and they set the rule in each different enterprise, they set a rule that says what is the maximum that any one person can make more than another person. In some cooperatives there, it's 1 to 1. Every person makes the same. And I can make the argument for why every job should have the same pay. And I won't make that argument here. It takes a long time, but I can certainly make the argument for it. But it's 8 to 1 in Mondragon. So that's just one point of how it's so significantly better than what we have now. The second point that I'll make is just that what they're pointing out there, that viewer is pointing out, is actually a logical fallacy. And so what it's known as is the Nirvana Fallacy. And if you look up, I urge you to look up, whoever it was that made that comment, look up the Nirvana Fallacy, and you'll see that you're falling into that same trap where it's the idea that, well, if your solution isn't perfect, then we shouldn't even bother trying anything, right? And so, it's absolutely a fallacy to fall into that trap.
Okay, hold on. Pro Center. Okay, so I'm gonna put this on screen, and I'm gonna rebut this. He says Mondragon operates within the capitalist state, and Spain is a member of the U.S. imperialist and NATO alliance. I'm going to be as respectful as I can. Obviously, and the thing is that anything we do is going to operate within a capitalist state until we change it. But what we're doing by having workplace democracy is we're planting the seeds of socialism within the workplace. Because if you have workplace democracy, which people spend most of their lives at work, a huge majority of America, the majority of Americans spend their lives at work, and they spend most of their time at work. If we can get them to a point where they have workplace democracy, then they start to think more democratically, and then we can also start having workers owning the means of production. And if that's the case, then that is a step in the right direction. We How many socialist countries are there? Very little. So why in the hell would we try to just move to a socialist country in order to enact socialist policies when we're trying to make it here? The thing is, the United States is definitely pretty much the worst country in the world, but at the same time, we're doing our best to change that. And by changing it, we do our best by enacting socialist policies on the ground. Instead of going from the top down, we're going from the bottom up. And part of
Absolutely.
that is through workers because they are the ones who hold the power. And if
Absolutely.
we let them know that they have the power through a workplace democracy, then guess what? From the bottom up, it's going to change.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
I understand that you're trying what you're trying to say, but the thing is, and yeah, co-ops. You say co-ops are cool, but it's not enough on its own to make a revolution, of course. But at the same time, over time, if you have co-ops, that's workplace democracy, and the whole idea behind income inequality, it gets taken down. Um, Institutional racism when it comes to hiring can be affected and diminished. And ultimately, it leads to the income inequality that we have between the super wealthy and the average worker. The gaps will shrink. So
Absolutely.
ultimately, it does lead to that. But the thing is that it's not necessarily us banging on the doors of politicians and tearing them out of their houses and beating them up on the street.
Yep.
No.
And that was perfectly said. And I would even and to bolster your points there, I would one ask that person, how did capitalism come about? Capitalism is now the dominant economic system across the world, right? How did capitalism arise in the wake of feudalism? Well, I'll tell you how. All right. What happened was little experiments in capitalism started to pop up all around the world. All right, and some of them were crushed by the feudal lords. Right, some of them
Hmm.
were crushed, but some of them survived and they started to grow. Right, and that's exactly how it grew and grew until it then started to dominate the system. So look at how capitalism came about. Just look at the history of any economic system that came about. In fact,
Yeah.
look at how it existed, how it came about within and under, under slavery, under feudalism, even through monarchical system, how feudalism arose. Again, it was through small experiments in new economic systems that began to grow, and of course some of them were crushed by the dominant economic system of the time, but some of them weren't. All right, and that's exactly how we had merchants under feudal system. We started with merchants, and these merchants began building up their capitalist, institutions and enterprises, and then those grew and grew until the point that they then took over and took control. Right, so we can use the same pattern to enact socialism. Right, we start with these small experiments in it and we grow those, right, and the some of them will be crushed naturally. The capitalist system, they're going to come in and they're going to try to dominate, they're going to try to crush us, but
Hmm.
some will survive. All right, Mondragon has survived for over 60 years. Look at the Emilia Romagna region of Italy. All right, how it has flourished. It is now 1/3 of the GDP for that region of Italy. All right,
Wow.
and they have a rule known as the Marcora law that says that if you become unemployed and you can find 9 other unemployed people to get together with you and you all agree to develop a democratic workplace, then instead of you collecting your weekly unemployment check like we do here in the United States, you can instead decide to get a one-time upfront payment of all of that for all 10 of you and use that as the capital to begin a democratic workplace. And that has
Wow.
allowed workplace democracy to flourish in that region of Italy. And so imagine if we had laws like that. That's why, I'll support politicians that support laws like that, but we don't see that is is so far out of the American psyche that I don't know of one single politician that has advocated for a Marcora law or something similar to it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. So, so I would just, urge people to look at how capitalism actually grew and came about, because it wasn't by some sort of violent revolution or anything like that that capitalism came into place, around the world. It was through these small experiments, and we only see the violent revolution in the case of in the response to slavery, really.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, you know, there was. Uh, I'm trying to connect definitely with the audience here. Pro Center, you asked the question, what do you guys think of the China model? Um, I'm not
I got one.
exactly I'm not exactly versed on China,
I've got some
but
thoughts on it for sure.
I'll get to you in a second. But from what
Yep.
I know, is China is what you call a state capitalist system.
Yeah.
And at the moment, right now, according to Dr. Richard Wolff, China has the fastest growing economy in the world. Their
Yep.
GDP is growing at a faster rate than the United States. And within a 10-year period, China will stand to be the biggest economic superpower in the world. They are basically ridding homelessness. And according to, I think it was according to 2017, there was a 70% home ownership rate among millennials. It is way lower here in the United States.
Yeah.
So really, China's model is actually better than the United States, even though it's still a capitalist model, but it's a state capitalist model.
Yep.
Um, so it's like a step below how terrible our system is.
Yep. 42%, I believe, is the number of millennials that own homes in the United States.
Mm,
So significantly lower, nearly half as many, in fact.
yeah, yeah,
So absolutely. Yeah, that is a stark contrast. And
yeah.
I agree completely. And what China calls themselves is communism with Chinese characteristics. And what it really ultimately amounts to is it's a hybrid system, right? There are some state owned, it's a, like you said, state capitalism. It does not get rid of the employer employee relationship. There is still an employer and employee in essentially every enterprise in China. The question is, who is your employer? Is it the state or is it a private entity? And what we found is, in some ways, having the state as the employer can be beneficial in some ways and can provide some better solutions in some ways, but it's still authoritarian in nature, and it's still totalitarian, it's still authoritarian by its very nature, and it doesn't really solve the problem that socialists are trying to solve in the micro sense of changing the who is actually owning the means of production, because that's considered public ownership over the means of production. But what we find is that it's not public. It's a handful of people that is known, that operates as the state, that actually ends up controlling it, and it's not the public that controls those means of production. So, but I totally agree with James in what he said about the fact that China is still, even with that, they have still been the fastest growing economy in the 21st century. And in the 20th century, it was Russia, yet another communist state that was able to grow at a faster rate than any other country. And it's not even close with China to the US nowadays. I mean, they grow at an average clip. Their average GDP growth is somewhere between 7 to 10%. The US is somewhere between 1 to 4% at best. So, in it, over the course of the pandemic, their economy grew. The US economy, the US economy shrank. So we can see that there's clearly, and not to say that China is, there's still tons of issues with state capitalism, and with this idea of state capitalism being, the repression that can come from something like that. They don't have as the same sort of freedom of speech. A lot of those sort of First Amendment rights, journalism, freedom of the press are definitely suppressed in China.
Hmm.
And that's a problem with the idea of any capitalist system, right? The fact that you have authoritarian control.
Hmm.
And so my judgment of my assessment of China, and I'm no expert on this by any sense of the imagination, but I listened to enough of the experts on it, and what my reading is that the sort of communist aspects of their economy have allowed them to grow, and often a lot of the growth that's associated with capitalism, when they say, oh well, capitalism has pulled X amount of people out of poverty, that number drops significantly when you pull China out of that equation or India out of that equation, right? So so China is also contributing a lot to the sort of success of capitalism as well, and again, they're doing it in a way that is more under more state control. But China still has private enterprises. They don't block private enterprises. There are plenty of private enterprises that are allowed in China, so they're not totally communist or by any sense of the imagination. They're absolutely state capitalists, as JB pointed out.
Yeah. If there's billionaires in China, it's not a communist country.
Yes.
I wanted to kind of switch gears, and I wanted to go to a tweet that you shared. I hope you don't mind.
No, don't mind at all.
And this is not putting you on blast or anything. This is actually
put me on blast. I don't even mind.
No. It's actually kind of more praising and highlighting your take. I'll put it that way.
Awesome.
So, and I like to do that. So
nice.
Okay. So let's increase this here. Okay, perfect. So I love how you said this should come with a trigger warning for child abuse. Because we're talking about working. This is child abuse to me.
Yeah.
And this is from a gentleman by the name of Chris Crawford. He said, huge shout out to this kid of mine, 14 years old and has a part-time job at Burger King. Not only does he work every day, he can, including weekends when most are out enjoying their summer. He goes in early and stays late almost every time he works. He loves every minute of it, making his own money, saving for a car, being responsible in his decisions, becoming a respectable young man. I couldn't be more proud of him. Some of y'all lazy, grown-ass people out there should take notes. #proud dad. And he has a picture of his son in his Burger King costume, looking like he should be at home trading Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but instead he's at the drive-through working his ass off in the summertime to save money for a car at 14 years old.
At 14.
Okay, so Kahmali, my friend,
this should be an indictment on capitalism, right? This should be an indictment of capitalism. This is, here we have a child who should be able to just be a kid, right? Like just out there. He said it himself, while most of his friends are out there, having fun, playing over the summer, this kid's working, and what's he getting for that work? At Burger King, minimum wage, most likely, especially because it's a kid, they're gonna give him the lowest possible salary that they can. And then the second thing that they'll do on top of that is then use that child to try to explain away why they can't raise their minimum wage as well. Because they'll say, well, we got kids, these are jobs for kids, even though Burger King operates during the school day, during every school day. So apparently it's not really jobs for kids because somebody else has to be doing those jobs when all the kids are at school, apparently. But they'll take that and use that as an excuse. And what we see here, that is, a 14-year-old, we fought so hard, and it was really socialists and communists that fought exceptionally hard to enact child labor laws in this country, right? Because we
Mhm.
recognize that it's abusive to force children into work at such an early age, right? And this idea that we would somehow, be praising them. I hate to use this word even in referencing children, to be honest, but like this is a part of the sort of hustle porn culture of America, right? Where we see it in our media. It gets replayed over and over in media. This idea of glorifying people for their hustle, right? Oh, they're hardworking, they have good work ethic, and they're really hardworking folks. He shows up early and he leaves late. The reality is that kid, as soon as at the drop of a dime, somebody can make a decision to fire that kid. They make one mistake, they can get rid of them. That's an extremely precarious job that he holds, and with no real, I mean, what is the what's the benefits there? You don't get to that being on your resume at
Yeah.
age 14. I mean, what does that do for you in your future? Really, that's time that you could have been spending trying to develop yourself as a human being, right? And just figure out what it is that you enjoy, what you love in life, what you have a passion for. That's what kids should be able to spend their time on, or just enjoying being a kid, right? You only get to be a kid once. Why should you have the responsibility of an adult on your shoulders? More responsibility than adults should even have on themselves. And somehow
Mhm.
we think that it's a good thing that we're putting that responsibility on a 14-year-old child.
Yeah. And I actually made a video about a week ago pertaining to capitalism and how it basically destroys childhood. Um, at 14, the reason why I wanted to work wasn't because I just wanted a job and I wanted money. The reason why I wanted to work was because my mother was struggling and she couldn't afford a lot, to take care of us. She wasn't making a living wage. She was single parent. And so as soon as I turned 16, I got a job. And the thing is that while you have a lot of other 16-year-olds who, even if they get a job, they get to just spend their money on themselves. And, if they want to save up money for stuff, then fine. But you're congratulating a child leaving their childhood early just so that you can own the libs.
Yes.
Um, and it's stupid because here's the thing. I love how you called that hustle porn because this is especially prevalent in the black community.
Mm-hmm.
Black people, I want y'all to come to to the screen really quick. I'm gonna have a discussion with y'all real quick. The reason why a lot of you feel like you have to hustle is because you don't make a living wage and your living conditions are shit. That's why you feel like you have to hustle. That's why you feel like you have to work beyond the 40 hours a week in order to make a actual living. Because if not, then your life is terrible. So
Yep.
it's not it's not laziness as to why you're suffering. It's the system itself as the reason why you're suffering. And that's why you have to hustle on the side in order to make a living. It's not because out of laziness. If you want to call somebody lazy, call the trust fund babies lazy because they're the ones who actually got all that money and they haven't earned a dime of it. So,
Absolutely.
I was raised in the hood and look, let me tell you, you got these people who are working 40 hours a week and then they make a mixtape and they're selling it from the back of their trunk, and going to the barbershops just to be able to make some extra dollars. It's like, hold up. They shouldn't have to do that in order to make a living. Like, okay, yeah, if they're trying to become an artist and stuff like that, of course, they want to do it out on the side, but as far as being able to make a living, somebody who has a job shouldn't have to also drive for Uber just
Yeah.
to make extra money. You know what I
Teachers are
mean?
doing that. Teachers are having to do that.
Yeah. So this whole notion that um you you're proud of your kid basically tossing their childhood away just so that they can have a job, you know. And part of me is like, wait, isn't that against child labor laws? I mean, he's 14. You know, how is he working at a Burger King? And pretty much the only thing he can do back there, because there's certain things that you can't do back there, like there's certain machines you can't operate. Like even when I was 16, 17 years old, and I used to work for Chick-fil-A back then. I didn't know who they were, so I didn't.
Damn, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I used to work for them. There were certain machines that I couldn't operate until I was 18.
Yeah.
So you have a 14-year-old, you know, working at a fast food restaurant. Like, come on, you know, let the 14-year-old and what is the 14 and how is the 14-year-old able to focus on school? That's my question. Like,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the wild thing is that, you know, and it's these same things are reinforced even in our education system, sadly, as well, where essentially our education system has now been completely designed to create obedient workers, essentially. It's grading. Richard Wolff actually has a great article on why grading is a tool of capitalism, right? And
hmm,
this idea that we have to strive for the right grades, right? Grades are a measure of how obedient you are, essentially. That's what they've become. And so
hmm,
it's just a way, our education system has completely been developed around creating obedient workers, right? That
yes,
so if you get A's, if you get straight A's, it means you're very obedient. You go, you do the work that you're told to do as you're told to do it. And there's no room for people that think outside the box or are more creative in that way, or may learn a different way than others, right?
hmm,
We then label those kids as, especially with Black and brown folks, and males as well, they tend to be labeled as having behavioral issues simply because they don't learn in the same way that these institutions have developed. And so those kids end up, you know, falling into the school to prison pipeline, or, you know, simply being cast aside, or having their intellect diminished because they simply don't happen to learn or operate the same way that, you know, businesses prefer. And so we've completely designed even our system of grading, where, in, you know, Professor Wolff, he's been a professor for 50 years, and he said professors don't like grading, students don't like being graded. What if we could, all the time that is spent for teachers on grading, what if instead they could spend that time actually, you know, working one-on-one with students, being able to give them better feedback without this idea that they have to then, you know, put the stuff everyone into a box of A, B, C, D, F. You know, like, what if we simply allowed people to use that time more actually productively, and to get the right kind of more direct feedback to their students, and to help them more directly. But because the whole system is being designed, even our education systems are designed to create these obedient workers. We see this, where it's like, this 14-year-old could, feels like it's a success to get this job at a Burger King, and to be stuck in this sort of minimum wage job, trying to gain more material things like a car that are only necessary, right? Cars are only necessary because we have such garbage public transportation systems. Like, if we really got together collectively, would we decide that we all want to have every single individual owning a gas-powered vehicle that's polluting our planet, when we could have much more efficient free public transportation systems instead? But they will put all that pressure on a child to be striving to buy this pollution vehicle or whatever, instead of working towards developing systems of public transportation that are more efficient, and better for better for ourselves, and better for our environment, and better for our economy as well. If we weren't all wasting money becoming these individual buyers and consumers. And that's why this system has reduced us all down so much to consumers at this stage, that even this child, a 14-year-old, he's concerned about being a consumer already. He's already, and his father here is reinforcing it, and saying, oh, look at my son striving to be a good consumer. And the reason they want to frame us all as consumers is because it allows them to not frame us as workers. Because if we see ourselves as workers and not as consumers, then we would recognize a sort of, when you're a consumer, well, guess what? The wealthiest people are consumers and the poorest people are all consumers, because if the poor people do it with debt, we rack up absurd amounts of debt in this country. Student debt, credit card debt, car debt for car loans, home debt for buying a home. So we're steeped in debt at this point, and all under the guise of being consumers, because it doesn't create a separation of employer and employee. It sees all of us as one, just all consumers. We're all consumers, instead of recognizing the real separation of labor here between employers and employees, and somehow pushing back or fighting against that. But they're already setting this 14-year-old kid up to be a nice, good, obedient consumer and a good, obedient worker.
Yeah.
And it's really sad to see.
Yeah, they teach compliance. That's pretty much what it is, and it's interesting that that's a whole nother discussion that I would like to get into
Yes.
another time, because
Yeah.
it definitely needs to be had. Um, I also wanted to touch on, man, we can talk about this stuff for hours. This is actually a great stream. I'm quite proud, to be honest with you. But I want
Yeah.
to give
Loving the
some,
comments, by the way, too. Love the engagement in the comments too. A lot of great comments there.
yeah, a lot of great comments. Oh, and there was a question pertaining to you. I want to make sure I get to it before we move on.
Awesome. Yeah.
Um, hold on.
Yep.
I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to find it. You guys are commenting so much. It's beautiful.
Oh yeah. I'm
It's
loving
kind of
it.
a. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. This was directed at you. Says, can Kahmali tell a little bit more about his own work, show, and activities? I'm local, so it'd be great to see on the in the ground person stuff he supports, leads, and amplifies.
Yeah, so my own work, again, the show it's based around workplace democracy, and advocating for workplace democracy, but we cover politics and news from a leftist socialist perspective, and my own work on the ground. I mean, I worked inside of campaigns. I volunteered for a Bernie Sanders campaign. I was a supporter of AOC and the Justice Democrats. So I did a lot of work within those sort of campaign electoral politics for multiple years. I did a lot of volunteering. I left jobs and decided to focus my time full time on political activism, climate, advocacy, and working on the ground with that. I spent an untold amount of time focused, I think, a little bit too much on electoral politics, and that sort of is what informed my perspective at this point. And as far as workplace democracy is concerned, my experience has been just what we've been doing, building up the show, right? I was an advocate for workplace democracy. Even when I was working, I was formerly a software engineer. I still am a trained, software engineer, got a degree in computer science at University of Massachusetts. And I was one of the top students in my class, did really well there, by all the sort of standard capitalist metrics, and developed my own software, but did it in a structured as it operated as a democratic workplace, but it was structured as a capitalist enterprise. I was the CEO. We elected a COO, all under the pressures of a capitalist, a corporate lawyer. Essentially, we won our University of Massachusetts Boston's 2014 business launch competition, which is a capitalist business launch competition, essentially designed as a sort of Shark Tank style thing. If you Google, me, you'll find, Kahmali Rose, UMass. You'll find articles and some news, segments about us winning that competition. And what that allowed us to do was to develop our own software. I developed software that was, again, it was education based software. I worked in the tech industry for about 5 years, working mainly in education technology. And so I also, I'm very familiar with sort of pedagogy and just sort of and that's why a lot of my criticism around the education system in the US, I feel like I have an ability to speak on it in a way, because not only have I been within academia for the vast majority of my life, but I also, after leaving academia, I then worked in education technology, and so my focus was still within academia and academic spaces, and so it's where I get a lot of my criticism from of these systems. And so I've worked as a capitalist, I've operated as a capitalist, I ascended to the level of CEO of a capitalist enterprise. And part of my critique of it comes from seeing it from the inside, right? Seeing how the sausage was made. When I won that business launch competition and we spoke to the corporate lawyer for the first time, what he urged us to do, first and foremost, was to try to maintain as small a controlling class of people as possible. So he said there were 3 of us initially that started the business, and they tried. The corporate lawyer tried to convince 2 of us to essentially maintain control just within the 2 of us, already trying to create this different class of people, the employer and employee, and trying to tell us that the way that we will maintain the best control over our enterprise is to have as few people making the decisions as possible. And so even when it was only 3 of us, they were already urging us to try to create this employer employee dichotomy, essentially, and to amass power within as few hands as possible. So a lot of my criticism of the capitalist system comes from being a major part of that, and from seeing how it operates, especially in the tech industry, where it's all based around the idea of going and presenting your idea and begging investors for money, essentially. And so you have the investor class, who's the true capitalist, and the whole system has been designed to convince people that their way of becoming successful is by begging investors, begging billionaires for their money, millionaires and billionaires for their money. In fact, you can't become an investor in the United States unless you have at least $250,000 of annual income for the past 2 years at least. Or you have to show, if you're married, you have to have at least 500,000. So it's literally designed to only allow millionaires into becoming investors. And then your job as an entrepreneur is to actually sell your idea and sell control of your company to these investors. You typically have to give up more than your majority control to investors over time. And so I've seen how it worked. I've seen how capitalist institutions have worked, and I was very disgusted by the process. I felt it was this constant feeling like I wasn't even in control of my own company, even when I started and founded it. So a lot of the things, and something that they tell a lot of like sort of working class blue collar people is just learn to code, right? Learn to code. That's what they tell everybody. Just go learn to code. And the thing that I always tell them is like, well, you know what? I did, and I saw it from the inside, and it's still gross even there. Even when you learn to code, you're still just another employee within these systems, and you don't ultimately have control. It's the capitalist investor class that has control over this. And so I have a vast sort of a broad range of experience from believing in the sort of neoliberal capitalist ideology, and what really radicalized me was just seeing it from the inside and recognizing it as inherently authoritarian and, like you said, totalitarian. And a great economist, historian, Sheldon Wolin, one of the greatest sort of economic minds of our time, who's unfortunately passed now, but Sheldon Wolin called American capitalist enterprises reverse totalitarianism. And I think he describes all capitalist enterprises as reverse totalitarianism, in the sense that they are totalitarian, absolutely, to their core. But what makes it reverse totalitarianism is that typically under totalitarian governments, those governments are at least beholden to a region of the world, right? Because they have control over some nation state, essentially. So they are totalitarian, but they are beholden to a region. What makes the capitalist enterprise even worse than that is that they aren't even beholden to a region. As capitalist enterprises, they can just pack up and leave and move over to wherever the labor's cheaper, or they have more, or the taxes are lower, and they can do that at any given moment. So what we have is even worse than totalitarianism in a capitalist system, because these people aren't even beholden to a nation or a region at all, these capitalist enterprises. So that's sort of my background. That's my experience, and it's been a weird but an arduous journey, to say the least, for sure.
Yeah, I got you. Thank you for that. There's another question here. I thought this was a pretty interesting question. Uh, he says, how could apprenticeships and worker co-ops help end the school to prison pipeline if they would?
Yeah, so
What?
that's a tough question. I don't think that worker co-ops are per se, like, them inherently are the solution to every single problem. But one way that I think that this would play out is that right now, the US system, right, how we fund our education system in the United States is very unique. In fact, I don't believe that there is one other place in the world that funds their education system in the same way that the United States does. The way that we fund our education system here is based on local property taxes. So that means that the more expensive the homes in the area, the more funding that education system will have, right? And so you're already setting up a system where the wealthiest people are going to get the best education systems, because they're going to have the higher priced homes, right? And we already know through a system of redlining that they went in and artificially devalued properties in Black and brown and Jewish owned areas, right? And so
Mhm.
and Irish as well. So they were able to devalue those properties just based on the fact that, well, you can literally read the redlining documents. It will say what the percentage of the Negro population was, or the Irish population is in this area, and based on that, they will devalue that, right? And it's a very interesting thing. I'll try to remember the name of the website where you can just read the actual documents that they've scanned in from different libraries that they've pulled these out of and researched this. And so through artificial devaluing of Black and brown homes and communities, that means that schools within those communities are funded at lower rates. In most other countries around the world, the way that they actually fund their education system is that they look at where the underfunded regions of the nation are, and they supplement those places with more funding. So if you have lower income, if you have lower property values in a certain area, that means that you're going to have lower incomes typically. So those are people that are more marginalized, struggling more. And what they do is they actually increase funding in those areas. Those schools are funded higher than the schools in places with higher property values. Why? Because places where people are wealthy, they already have the means of things like being able to pay for tutors for their kids, extracurricular activities, after school programs. They can fund all of those with their own private money. It's the places where the people are struggling that they need more funding. We need to increase
Yeah.
funding to those places. So one way that we would do that is by taking control back over our economic system and gaining economic power. We can then influence our political system. Look to places like Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, that have started with Black worker cooperatives, and now are using their economic influence to influence politics as well within their communities and to change policy. So I think the way that we do it is by gaining economic power. We can then gain political power, and we can finally have a say over things like how we fund our education system. And unfortunately, I don't think that until we control the means of production, and until we control the surplus of our labor, we don't possess enough economic power in order to actually affect policy in this country. So
Mhm.
the way we do that is by changing the way that we fund our education systems. But the way we change the way we fund our education systems is only by gaining true democratic economic power. I'll just use Massachusetts as an example, because we have some of the best schools here in Massachusetts, but we also fund charter schools, and we also have vast wealth and income inequality in Boston and in Massachusetts more broadly. But in Boston alone, there was a study done in 2017. The median white family, the wealth of the median white family is $247,000. The median wealth of a Black family in Boston at the same time was $8. Okay, so $8 to $247,000. All right. And so that means that where Black people are tending to live in poorer, communities, they're going to have worse education systems. And so even in a so-called liberal state like Massachusetts, right, we're considered liberal. 80% of our legislature is controlled by Democrats. So there is total Democratic control over our government here. We do have a Republican governor, which is sad, and some weird phenomenon that happens in the Northeast here, where we tend to have Republican governors in Democratic states, just oddly. But it's because even the Democrats here are by and large pretty conservative. And so this idea that we can somehow, change policy by just electing enough Democrats, it just doesn't bear out. If you look at a place like Massachusetts, it doesn't bear out. If that were true, we would have changed the funding system for education here in Massachusetts, but we don't. We still are beholden to the same funding of our education system. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but the reality is, it's not going to come directly, I don't think, but it will happen over time, slowly, if we are able to gain, enough economic power that we can start to influence policy at a state and then national level.
Yeah, thank you for that. Pertaining to, trying to halt the school to prison pipeline, especially through. It would probably be better served through a workplace democracy, because if people are able to make a living wage, then they also will be able to have more property taxes to provide for that school in that area. Um, but I also agree that any place that has uh, a lower income area should be basically subsidized. The finances should be offset and given uh, more generously to that area in order to have equal education for all.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And one other thing that I just thought of too with that is that, of your point is that one of the places that we would have workplace democracy is within our school systems, right? Schools are a workplace, right, for the teachers. And
Yep.
so if we had workplace democracy, if those teachers were able to democratically, vote on these things, we could have, and again, workplace democracy, it also extends. There are models of workplace democracy where
Yeah.
it's not just the workers that are included in that, but also the consumers as well. So that would be the parents as well having a say, and get together a bunch of parents and the teachers and allow them to vote on things like, should we be let's look at the data of how we punish Black students versus how we punish white students, and we will see the disproportionate way that Black students are suspended and expelled from schools. I was expelled from a school. I was suspended from one school, a private school, 14 times before I was ultimately expelled from that school and wound up in a charter school at Boston Latin School. And so we can see how Black kids, and I was suspended 14 times for fighting because of the racism. I had 5-foot long dreads when I was growing up. I was raised Rastafarian. And so I had 5-foot long dreads growing up. And I had white kids at my school calling them shitlocks. And when they would tease me for my hair, and I was one of the 3 Black kids at the school. I mean, there were only 45 kids in the school total. It was a very small private school on an island in Boston Harbor. But 3 Black kids in the school, and I was constantly picked on. And when I responded to that by getting into fights, I was suspended repeatedly, because it was, even though they were provoking it with their racism, my response to it being to defend myself from having my hair pulled and things like that was to fight back. And when I fought back, I did so successfully. And what ultimately happened was I was punished disproportionately, and I ended up getting suspended and expelled from that school. So this is just anecdotal, but we know that this happens at a mass level, across the country. And so the reality is, if we gave the parents and the teachers a democratic vote on what was happening within those school systems, I guarantee you that Black parents and Black communities, and especially if we require teachers to come from the communities that they serve, then even more so, I think that we would see a response that would say, no, we will not do things like, I think that you would see there's massive support for removing cops from schools. That's one of the major problems. That's one of the major, catalyst for the school to prison pipeline, is the fact that we started putting cops in schools. And what that does is to start to criminalize behavior that would typically be seen as just kids acting up, right? And that then gets seen as, that gets criminalized, and then people are sent to jail, right? So that's a part of it, is to by allowing these teachers and the parents as well, I think, to have a say democratically in those systems, then we would see things like cops being removed from schools, and suspensions and expulsions of Black and brown kids being, lowered, because it would have to be, that we would review the data and we would see scientifically that there is something unfair and unequal when two kids are being punished differently for the same exact behavior. So that's just one other thought I have on why workplace democracy would actually be help to eradicate the problem of the school to prison pipeline.
That was very beautifully put. That anecdotal evidence helps to really flesh out why workplace democracy, including in our spaces of education, are deeply important. Um, just looking at some of the comments. Let me see.
One comment I saw from Virtual Jonathan says, Kahmali, come out here and support the St. Vincent nurses, please. I absolutely do support them. I've been meaning to actually get out there. I've gone to teacher strikes I've been to multiple teacher strikes around the sort of in my local area and in a few different places in Massachusetts. And so there was one last year in Dedham that, went out there and supported. And so I absolutely do support the nurses strike, and will absolutely, I will try to get out there. I'm also, I'm a struggling person as well myself, but I want to show support to those nurses. I think we did a segment on our show covering it, and we do want to do an update on that as well, just because it is a very important strike. And I am 100% in support of those striking workers. And, my mother's a nurse. Two of my brothers are nurses. I support the nursing community in general and more broadly, and absolutely agree that they should be on strike and are completely valid in their demands. And so I just want to say that, and say that I will try my best, Virtual Jonathan, to get out there physically and to support, and maybe we can cover it live on the show as well. So I'm gonna jot that down, and I will actually try to get out there. And I am sorry to the nurses for not having been out there already, to be honest.
Yeah. That's deeply important. And make sure to subscribe to the Radical Democracy Show with Kahmali Rose, because he does, a lot of great work. And don't forget to, do you have a Patreon too?
Yes, we have a coffee, ko-fi.com/radical democracy. We're also on Patreon. You can search for us, Radical Democracy. It's at patreon.com/radical democracy. And the thing about that's so important is that, I'm surviving on unemployment right now. And if I wasn't collecting unemployment, and, with unemployment, you have to still search for lucrative work while you're doing it. And this doesn't, sadly, they don't count this work that I'm doing here as lucrative work. So I still have to spend my time searching for jobs and things like that. And so, the only way that I can do this full time is if we actually get enough funding to, just support first, just my basic needs, and then to hopefully extend that to, everyone that works here. We have our producer, Tammy. I work with my co-host, Kwame, as well, whose wife is a teacher within the Boston public school system. So they, none of us are wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. I actually live, I'm housing insecure. I live with a friend who doesn't, charge me rent. And if I didn't have that, I would probably be homeless right now. So wow. I'm not in a great place myself personally, but I'm fighting my best to try to advocate for things that I believe will change the world and will change, these sick, inhumane systems that we operate under. And so we really do need that support. And I know it's so tough to ask people for for money when I know everyone's struggling. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck right now. So it's really hard. And I know it's really hard for everyone. And I don't want anyone to contribute if they can't afford it, or if you're struggling, or if you're unemployed, you know, don't contribute. But if you can afford it, even if it's $1, we really do appreciate it. And we, you know, until we get up to, you know, probably like at least like $600 or $700 a month, I think that that can at least sustain me on a bare bones sort of like I can have enough money to eat sort of at the basic level. But yeah, I've had to look at things, you know, because of mental health struggles as well, even things like looking at trying to get on disability as well. And that's been a struggle because of the way the sort of medical racism that we face as well. But that's another story for another day.
Oh, we can definitely talk about that, and we will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're getting a lot of love from the comments, and that's
Yeah.
because largely people on the left have what we call empathy and compassion,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons why I love the left. Um, but speaking of empathy and compassion, I also want to kind of do a dual uh, attention to a tweets. One is from our comrade Nick, also known as Socialist
Nice.
MMA.
Love Nick.
And this is going to be pertaining to yours as well.
Awesome.
So I'm going to use this as a jumping off point. Oops, no, wait,
Thanks for
yeah.
all the love in the comments too, everyone. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm,
Love and appreciate you all.
mm-hmm. So Nick says mainstream political discourse right now is, let me see, mainstream political discourse right now is desperately trying to distract you from the active class war that the ruling class is waging right now. That should be the main topic of discussion. Fuck political theater. Billionaires are stealing wealth from us with impunity. And that actually leads to a tweet that you have put out, which I want to also show. Let me see. Yes. And you said, I've been unemployed for the past 2 years. I owe $12,000 in federal taxes on unemployment benefits, while these billionaire scumbags don't pay a dime. These oligarchs, the IRS, and both corrupt capitalist political parties can all be eat a bag of dirty dicks, which I completely agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Now, because I shared that, I want to present this as well because there is a reason why you say this, and this needs to be talked about. This is from ProPublica,
Mhm.
and this says the secret IRS files trove of never before seen records reveal how the wealthiest avoid income tax. And it says ProPublica has obtained a vast cache of IRS information showing how billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Warren Buffett pay little in income tax compared to their massive wealth, sometimes even nothing. Um, and I'm going to scroll this down, and I want to get your opinions on this and your thoughts. But this is the ultra wealthy by the numbers, wealth, income, and taxes for four of the richest people in the country from 2014 to 2018. And it shows how much they have in wealth, the income they reported, the taxes paid, but the actual true tax rate after they have gotten their accountants and lawyers to go through all the loopholes. Um, And as you can see, Warren Buffett, the same guy who virtue
Mhm.
signaled and said, oh, we actually need to pay more in taxes. Yeah, people, he was virtue signaling bullshit to you because his true tax rate is 0.10%. Kamali, go.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like, this should enrage anyone looking at this. This means that working class people. Jeff Bezos, he paid nothing in federal income taxes, both in 2007 and 2011. This is the wealthiest, him and Elon Musk keep going back and forth. And there's, I think, one other person just, jumped the line too, as being the wealthiest people in the entire world. And they are paying nothing in federal taxes. And, even worse than that, they then take their money and they use it to influence our political system. Look at what Amazon has been doing to Shama Sawant, and what, Jeff Bezos' company there is doing to Shama Sawant in Washington. It's city councilor in Seattle, and they're running a recall campaign against her. And they donated $1 million against her to opponents running against her in our last election. So, not only are these people not paying anything into taxes to help fund the government, but then they turn around and they use all that money that they save from not having to pay taxes to then corrupt our political system. And so it should outrage anyone that a working class person, somebody that is this 14-year-old kid working at Burger King probably paid he paid more in federal taxes than billionaire Jeff Bezos, and we're supposed to somehow look at that as some to applaud this or something. So yeah, this is, and it's the way that they do it that's so insidious too. I mean, they use this thing where they pretend as if they like to use it for PR, where they say, oh, I'm only gonna collect $1 in income for this year. I'm only going to take $1 in wages for this year. So they'll say, I'm taking $1, I'm taking no pay for my my pay for the year. But what they do then is because they don't have to report, that money doesn't get reported as income. They don't have to take that as income, and that income would be taxed at around a 30% rate. When your income that you get, payroll income, payroll taxes are about 35% for the average worker. So what they do is then they don't pay that, and instead they just they buy properties, and as long as they're not making any money, as long as they're not selling anything, then they don't have to pay any taxes, because when they sell stuff, they have to pay on that because that's considered income. So they don't sell anything, they simply buy up all these different things, and what they do is they then borrow money from these big banks. They are then able to borrow millions of dollars against their holdings, right? So they say, look at all this stock I own, and most of their income is coming in capital gains, which are taxed at less than half the rate of the work that we do when we're actually out there physically laboring for a company. And so they then take that money that they borrowed, and the banks go to them and they say, well, you're so wealthy, you're so rich, and you have all these assets, so we're actually going to lend to you at a lower rate than we lend to your average citizen. And so they will come in and they'll say, we'll lend you $10 million at a rate of about 3%. Instead of you having to take a $10 million payroll income from your job and then having to pay 30% on that $10 million, you can take $10 million from us, just borrow it from our bank, and you'll only have to pay 3% tax on that. So and ProPublica reported all of this. That is an amazing article out of ProPublica, and they said there's more data. They plan to release more of this data in the coming days, weeks, and months. And so I feel like there's even more shoes to drop in this argument. But this is just insidious behavior from the wealthiest people in our country and around the world. And they have all these types of tax dodges and loopholes that they use, that only if you can afford the most expensive lawyers in the country could you ever gain the same benefits. And here you have people on unemployment being taxed on unemployment. Like, for one, why the hell are we taxing unemployment? Some states don't tax employment. Here in Massachusetts, they tax employment. It's absolutely absurd to me for you, the government, to give me money and then say, oh, but now we're going to need to take some back from you. Just give me what you're going to give me in the end. Then don't take the taxes out to begin with. You can't give desperate people the choice of whether or not to take taxes out of that money. When you're struggling and you're up against it and you're making a decision, do I have enough money to eat? You're going to take every dollar you can get, even if it means getting hit with again, like I did, a $12,000 bill at the end of the year for it. And so it's, it's just this broken, and it's not even a broken system. It's the wrong way to frame it, really. This system is designed, it's working exactly as it's designed. And that's why we need fundamental system change. We have to change the system because this is how it operates. And until we change the actual system, it's going to continue to operate as such. So that's especially painful, I think.
Yeah. And, for people who say that, oh, we don't need to raise taxes on the wealthy because they're the job creators. It's like, how many jobs are they actually creating while only paying 1/10 of 1% of their actual wealth? And the thing is that they have more money to do with, in multiple lifetimes.
Yeah.
And so I have no sympathy for any of these people.
Yes, not one bit.
Yeah. And so I think honestly, you know, and even from a modern monetary theory, you don't have to actually increase taxes on them.
Yeah.
But I say do it anyway because billionaires should not even exist.
Yes, yes.
You know.
Let's not forget what the marginal tax rate was under FDR and Lyndon B. Johnson. No, like these are no socialists by any stretch of the imagination, right?
No.
And look at what the marginal tax rate was under them, under Dwight Eisenhower. Look at what the marginal tax rate was under Dwight Eisenhower and FDR. It literally hit 94%. And right now, it's at, we're talking about raising it. Joe Biden has proposed raising it up to 25%. All right. And so it's like, when we're talking about these marginal tax rates, we're not even in the atmosphere. We're not even in the vicinity of what it should be at this stage, and that was in a response to crises like a world war. And we're now facing crises like economic crisis, Great Depression. That was in response to Great Depression and World War. Now we have another, Great Recession or Great Depression that we're under right now, mass unemployment and a public health crisis, a global pandemic. And this is the time that we need to respond by taxing the hell out of the wealthy. And the reality, like you said, James, we don't even need to raise the taxes. We absolutely should, but we just need to start to enforce the tax code that we have now, and to actually take the taxes and let the effective tax rate match the actual tax rate.
It's funny. This is going to sound kind of weird. And so, you guys in the comments, I'm just speculating. I'm not actually totally serious about this, but it's just an idea I'm just throwing out there. Especially in a black household, you have what we call house rules, right? So the person who pays the most bills has the most say in the house. So it's like, wait a minute, if you guys really want to have the most say in the government, then pay more of the bills. Pay more in taxes and you guys can have a greater say. I mean, that's not necessarily democratic, but even from that aspect, it's like, okay, you guys are paying the least, so therefore you guys actually have the least amount of say in the entire U.S. economy. So
Yeah,
you guys shouldn't even have much of a say to say anything at all, because who pays the
absolutely.
majority of the taxes? Is those of us who are working class. I mean, working Americans pay most of the taxes. So therefore, any of the rich honestly need to sit down and shut the fuck up. They shouldn't even have
Yes.
a say. They shouldn't even have the phone numbers to any of the politicians.
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? So, truth be told, even from that aspect, they don't deserve to have anything to say. But, of course, we want it to be democratic, so it's one person, one vote, and their money should not equal speech whatsoever.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that's the thing, is that in capitalist institutions and capitalist enterprises, the actual rule is not one person, one vote. It's one share, one vote, right?
Yeah.
And so it's essentially operates as like $1, one vote, one share, one vote. And so it's in no way democratic, these these capitalist enterprises. And I know that because, again, I developed one. I got to decide how many shares there were, and I got to decide how many shares everyone had. And I had millions of shares, And my co-founders had millions of shares. And if we had a new employee come in, they were telling us to give them thousands of shares versus our millions of shares. So that's millions of votes. Every share you get is one vote that you get in a capitalist enterprise, truly. And so that if, and most people that own shares in a company, you own what, like 2 shares of like, some little, you can't like I forget what like a share of like Amazon right now is like hundreds of dollars or something. You can barely own 1 or 2 shares of these things. Jeff Bezos has millions of shares of Amazon stock. So the idea that you would ever have an equal say is completely unfounded. And so, yeah, I just, we don't have a system of one person, one vote by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we're rounding out our live stream, I wanted to get now.
I can't. Has it already almost been 2? I cannot believe that it's been that we've been doing this for an hour and 40 minutes. I just gotta say, like, it just feels like time truly flies by. Like, I cannot believe that we are towards the end here. I can talk about this all day with you, James.
Yeah, that's because you're the realist. That's why. Um, so the journalist Rachel Maddow, right?
Oh yes, yes,
Miss
yeah.
Miss
The
Miss
political yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, Miss Russiagator.
Yep.
Um, and anybody who is, sympathetic to the Democratic Party and who believes the hype of Russia meddling in our elections, I want to show you guys something. Take a look at this. Hang on. I got to figure out how to. There we go. Okay, so this is a Time magazine article that was put out in 1996.
Mhm.
Okay, and this says Yanks to the rescue. That's I think Boris Yeltsin, who was the prime minister of Russia. And it says the secret story of how American advisors helped Yeltsin's win.
Mhm. Hmm. Hmm.
Russia meddling in our election.
Yeah.
Russia meddling in our election? Russia meddling in our election. What about United States meddling in other elections? Because
Look at our
as you can
CIA.
see here, as you can see, the United States is actually bragging about meddling in Russian elections. Your thoughts?
Oh, I have plenty on this. I mean, this is something that the U.S. has done for so long and so often with complete impunity. Our CIA is world renowned for their ability to affect democratic elections in the most undemocratic of ways, supporting and even leading coups all around the world, particularly in the global south.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done this for decades, as we can see here, and it's no secret, and it comes as no surprise or shock to anyone paying attention to global politics. The U.S. is known around the world as the number one exporter of terrorism. We are the one of the most undemocratic and influential nations in the world and over the past century and more. And we do this by undemocratically influencing other countries' elections constantly. And we see America putting their thumb on the scales even to this day. Right now, Joe Biden is doing it right now. All right. In Haiti, all right, there is the leader in Haiti right now, Jovenel Moise, was supposed to have left office at the beginning of this year. He has decided that he will not, and Joe Biden has backed him up in that support. We saw it in Venezuela with the undemocratically named Juan Guaido, who has just suddenly tried to name himself as the de facto president of Venezuela, and with having been voted for by less than like 5% of the electorate ever. We had both Trump and Joe Biden now coming in and effectively supporting Juan Guaido in this undemocratic coup against Nicolas Maduro. And so we can see it. I mean, look at Bolivia. Look at we can talk about instance after instance. Look at what happened in Nicaragua. The under Obama. This is something that plays out constantly, where the U.S. has their thumb on the scale of elections all around the world, and then we turn around and we play victim and we say, "Oh, Russia, Russia, Russia," when the reality is that Russia had little to no influence over our election. They did a couple of memes on Twitter, essentially, and that's what they're calling influence over our election. When the United States is able to brag on one of the most popular magazine front pages about the way that they influence elections in other countries. And we do it through cyber warfare. We do it through straight up actual hot wars, and we've done it through cold wars. So we use every means available to us to affect outcomes of other countries' elections to the benefit of U.S. empire. And so we have to recognize this as just U.S. imperialism in action, and nothing should surprise us about this from dating back 20 years. It's happening right now, today.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Because if you look on the screen, it says the United States involvement in regime change. This is from Wikipedia. This takes 2 seconds to search on Google. Now, I want to, this is all of the interventions that the United States has been involved in for the last over 100 years, starting in the 1800s. And just to name a few, Samoa, Hawaii, Panama. This is all the countries that the United States has either attempted and successfully tried to take over, or they have tried and failed, but they have tried nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So you have Samoa, Hawaii, Honduras, Cuba, Nicaragua. It says Mexico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Russia, Japan, Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Philippines, Austria, South Korea, China, Greece, Italy, Costa Rica, Albania, Burma, China, Korea, Egypt, Iran, Cuba, Guatemala, Syria, Indonesia, Lebanon, South Vietnam, Iraq, and Cuba. By the way, we're not even to the 1960s yet. And
wouldn't it be easier to just name all the countries we haven't tried to?
That's exactly my point. If we just named the countries that we haven't tried to take over, it'll actually be a shorter list.
Yep.
And the mere fact that you have people claiming that, oh, Russia tried to meddle in our elections. What about what we did? Why in the hell do we have 800 military bases around the world? Why? I think China has like what, 2 military bases? We have over 800. For what reason?
Exactly. And in the cost of maintaining those military bases around the world, I mean, imagine if, Russia tried to put a military base, in like Canada and Mexico and Cuba and just imagine if what the reaction of the US would be to that sort of hostility. We see that as hostility, but we don't recognize it as hostility when it's US empire operating all around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, to anybody who's watching this who still believes that Russia was meddling in our elections, number one, even if they were, who did they learn it from?
Yeah.
The United States. That's who they learned it from.
Exactly. And I don't even think that this is like, some people will try to claim, I'm not that anyone in the comments is doing so, but some people will try to claim that this is like some sort of whataboutism argument, but it's not, because it's so disproportionate. It is not a whataboutism argument. This is
Yeah.
literally to say, this is sort of like when people try to like, argue, that it's like a whataboutism, when you're like, no, look at what's happening. Look at what Israel does to Palestine,
Yeah.
It's not what aboutism, because what we're talking about there is settler colonialism, and you got one force that is the occupier, one force that is the occupied. The United States has so much outsized power in the world because we are the global superpower, that this
Yes.
is in no way a whataboutism. This is absolutely a fair critique to say, yes, look at what we do, not just in Russia, but everywhere. So great point, JB. Just great point.
Oh, Gene, I want to give some love to this comment too. Gene says there are a lot of U.S. secret bases as well. No doubt.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
just
Yes.
like, for instance, when people keep talking about the military budget for the United States, they always reference the $735 billion in military budget that we have. But here's a fact that a lot of people don't know: the nuclear arsenal that we have is not listed under the military budget; it's listed under the Department of Energy. So if you were to take the budget from the nuclear arsenal that we have and then combine it with the budget for the military, that means we're spending probably over $1 trillion on our military.
That's wild. That's wild. And you know what? That's a point that I didn't even realize, to be perfectly 100% honest, that was included, the nuclear arsenal, under Department of Energy. But it makes perfect sense that it is. I know that they control, the Department of Energy, is, controls the nuclear our nuclear arsenal. So that makes perfect sense, and that is, just a wild fact that gets underplayed and underrated, constantly. And I think that is significant.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's incredible.
Yeah. So the whole notion that the United States is good, and who is it? What's her name? She's the new co-host on Rising. Emily Jasinski.
Jashinsky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Emily Jasinski. The fact that she on live TV now, let's be honest, she is a political commentator and a journalist, and she is basically regurgitating the same notion that the United States largely does good in the world, is not just a disconnect, but is immense ignorance on her part,
Absolutely.
because she bought into the propaganda. Mind you, she's part of the Federalist Society, so
Yes.
that gives you a notion, an insight on what she believes. But the fact that she's believing in the propaganda and doesn't know some of these things, like, the United States has done so much more terrible atrocities around the world in comparison to what they've done that was good.
Absolutely.
And even when the United States does something good, quote unquote good, it's typically for something atrocious. So, like, for instance, we're giving $3 billion, I think, per year to Israel, but
Yeah.
Israel is committing atrocities, basically genocide against Palestinians. So the good that we do is actually helping out, you know, uh, basically eradicate Palestinians,
It's a
or
fascist settler colonialism is what
yeah,
it is. Yeah.
yeah, or we're giving money to Saudi. We're sorry, we're selling
And to your
weapons to
point
Saudi.
as well, JB, to
Yeah,
your point
uh,
about
uh,
the extension of the military budget, that also doesn't get included in our military budget. That's included in the foreign aid budget, and that $3 billion is by and large being used to fund the military, support in Israel, and to fund U.S. military interest in that region as well. So that also gets left undercounted as well. So just to your point is, on what the true military budget is, that should be included in that as well.
well, yeah, and we can also go to the selling of arms to Saudi Arabia so that they can commit their proxy war in Yemen. and start killing your many people. So when you look at exactly what the United States has been doing, the reason why the world is shit, and a huge majority of a lot of the issues that's going around in the world is due to what the United States does abroad. I mean, look at what
Absolutely.
we've done to, the global south. I mean, as far as that list of the countries that we tried to take over, it is riddled with the names of countries in the global south that we had tried to take over, from Brazil to Honduras to Nicaragua to Venezuela, Colombia. We have tried, and, in some ways successful, to place puppet shadow governments within these nations. I mean,
Yes.
the latest one was Bolivia and I think Peru. So, luckily they put their middle finger up and said, "Fuck you, United States. You're not going to take us over." Thankfully, that happened, but the United States isn't going to stop. They're going to keep going and try to do it again.
Absolutely. I recently had on a wonderful voice on the left, Tamanisha John. She's a PhD candidate in international affairs, and I encourage you to have her on the JB show sometime. She's an just an exceptional mind on the left, and
Hmm.
something that she points out that I think is so important in on the left for us to start to include in our narrative on the U.S. When we talk about the U.S. military budget, is to talk about it in the same way that we talk about defunding the police. I think that we need to start talking about defunding the military as well, but in the same
Yes.
sense that we talk about defunding the police. When we say
Yes.
defund the police, we're talking about not just taking away money from the police, but putting money into the resources that will combat the sort of institutional problems that lead to this increased policing in the first place, right? And so we
Mhm.
talk about using it to sort of make reparations, right, to the communities that have been damaged by
Yes.
policing, right?
Yes.
And so in the same way, when we talk about defunding our military, we need to be thinking about how we are actually going to spend that money. A lot of the times the argument gets made on the left, and I think it's an unfortunate one, where we say we should defund our military in order to support and in order to fund programs here in the United States. But I think before we can ever do that, we need to first use that money. When we defund our military, we need to first use that money to make reparations to all the countries we've destroyed and damaged around the world first. All the people whose lives we've harmed with that military budget need to be restored and repaired first with that
Mhm.
money. So taking care of and funding and paying out reparations to the Palestinians who we helped to colonize by funding Israel and by supporting Israel the way that we have, to those civilians in Yemen that we've damaged and destroyed and starved by our support for Saudi Arabia and all of
Mhm.
their mass bombing campaign of the Yemeni people. And
Yeah.
in the global south and all around the world, we need to start to pay out reparations.
Mhm.
It's not just black folks in America that are owed reparations. It's also all those disaffected communities all around the world that have been harmed
Yeah.
by our military budget. We need
Yeah.
to make right with it.
Yeah. There's a lot of people. I want to give attention to Jonathan Schellberg. I completely forgot to give this shout out. Thank you for the award and contribution. It's much appreciated. Thank you so much, Jonathan
Thanks,
Schellberg.
Jonathan. Appreciate that. Yep. Support JB Show. We need support for programs like this. We
Yeah.
please support folks.
Mhm. Uh, Now we only have like a couple minutes left, but I also wanted to present this on screen. This question says, "Are the military interests the same as corporate or elite interests? Does the military function on behalf of the elite, or are they the elite?" Um, I would say, to answer to your first question, yes, they are.
Yeah.
Does the military
Yes.
function on behalf of the elite, or are they elite? Both. The answer is both. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I don't think military members, like individual soldiers, within the military, I don't believe that those are elite people. Those are
Hmm.
typically poor working class people that have been forced into a situation where they're desperate. They recruit, they do a lot of their recruiting in black and brown and poor communities where people are struggling, and they say, you know what? You're not going to get to college because we don't fund we don't have a universal college program here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We can take care of your healthcare. We can take care of your education. And so they use that, your desperation as a poor working class person, and particularly in Black and brown communities, to recruit for the military.
Mm-hmm.
They also pay the starting pay for a soldier in the U.S. military is $19,000 for a private in the U.S. military. So by no means are the individuals that are functioning within the sort of, the everyday soldiers, the sort of masses, the vast majority of them, the ones that are not, I forget what the term is when you're a sort of, the generals, there's a name for it. I'm blanking on the name right now, but the sort of, those are typically the elites. The military elites are the ones that are sort of, the somebody in the comments will probably know the word for it. It's somebody that's been in the military. JB I think he was in the, but those officials that are at the higher levels, I do believe that they operate as elites, and they are part of the elite class.
Yeah, you're talking about the Joint Chiefs. A lot of
Exactly.
them,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So those, I believe, are elites, and I think that, like you said, JB, as an institution, it absolutely operates to the benefit of corporate capitalist political elites. So yes, in that sense, it absolutely, they do uphold the interest of the elite. I think that the individual members within our military typically aren't elite. They're typically poor people. They all come back from these wars with PTSD and all kinds of things, and then we just cast them aside onto the streets. We don't give them the healthcare they need. They're out there begging for money and homeless. And so, we have over 50,000 veterans on any given day that are homeless in this country. So I don't think that the individuals within it are necessarily elite, but I think the institution is an elite institution and operates to serve the interests of the corporate elite. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just look at what happened in Bolivia. That was literally about securing lithium for batteries for, Elon Musk in these electric powered vehicles. And we have to recognize that even that is, to the benefit of, corporate, U.S. Empire and U.S. corporatism. Absolutely.
Just look at the Iraq war, the war in Afghanistan, and think oil and think opium.
Yep.
And that'll give you the answer that you've been looking for.
Yep.
Gosh. Okay. So this has been a wonderful discussion.
Yes.
Kahmali Rose, political commentator and host of the Radical Democracy Show. Please donate to his Patreon and his Ko-Fi. And please continue to follow. Where can they follow you on Twitter?
I'm at Onto the Fifth on Twitter, and you can also find on YouTube and Twitch Radical Democracy on YouTube and Twitch. Please subscribe, check us out. Really, I got an interview coming up that I'm going to be releasing soon. Just been doing a lot of editing on it with Awkward. He's an abolitionist, rapper, activist, and he worked with Nick, Socialist MMA, on the 10 Demands for Justice, which is a road to abolition, the abolition of police and prisons. I think it's a great discussion. It was an amazing interview, just talking to him. And so keep an eye out. That's going to be dropping soon.
Thank you so much. And I will be having a new discussion at 7 p.m. tonight. I will be doing a primetime special with the non-voting felon, Michael Tinavasa.
Love him, yes.
And we will be discussing more about a continuation of last week's discussion. We'll be discussing about how basically people in the hood, why do they make the decisions that we make, and why is it tied to capitalism? And we'll be doing that tying. I think you guys have an idea, but tune in at 7 p.m. Also, I'm not exactly sure if Nick, Socialist MMA, will be having anything on later today, but stay tuned to Fred Hampton Leftist around the 4 o'clock hour. He might be having something on, and stay tuned in Twitter. But I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone in the comments. This has been amazing. And I want to thank you for coming on, Kahmali. You are a gentleman and a scholar.
So right back at you, JB. Really, right back at you. Love talking to you. Always love our discussions. So looking forward to having you on the Radical Democracy Show again. soon, hopefully. And yeah, just shout out to all the folks in the comments. Really enjoyed. I've been keeping an eye out on all the comments as they come through. And I love to see the engagement in the chat like that. And that's really cool. And so shout out to everyone for joining us and, adding to this discussion in a really, cool and interesting way. And so, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.